Okay, welcome back, class. And I know it's been a long gap, but we got some requests from some students to cover subject verb agreement and tenses again as a sort of revision. So today we are going to cover tenses. We are just going to go over the things that we did in class and take a few examples for you to understand. But broadly, I want to start the first video today by taking you through a basic understanding of what each tense stands for. And we're not going to cover all the tenses. We are first going to understand what the common tenses are that are used in academic writing, the most common ones. Of course, all tenses can be used in academic writing, but there are some that are used more often than others. So we're just going to look at those ones first. And we'll look at a list of those tenses, and then we'll try and understand what each tense means, and then we'll try and understand the structure that's involved in those tenses. Okay, once we've done this, then we can go on and look at examples and try to understand where, in which chapter, in which section of your writing each tense is likely to be found. So let's get started. Alright, now if you ask me, I would say that more than 90% of your thesis would be covered by these 5 tenses. Of course, there are other tenses that can be used, like we mentioned earlier, but these 5 tenses will cover 90% of your work at least. So if you understand these 5 tenses well, then 90% of your work would be error-free, okay? At least in terms of tenses. So these tenses are simple present, the simple past, the present perfect, the present continuous, and the simple future. Now we'll go look at each of these tenses one by one and try to understand what these tenses stand for. Okay, so we'll start with the simple present. Now in the simple present, I've taken 2 examples over here. So again, we're trying to take only research specific examples so that these lessons are as relevant to you as possible. Example is table 1 demonstrates. So whenever you have a table or a figure or a chart and you want to talk about what that table represents or what that figure shows or what that chart represents, then you tend to use the simple present, right? So table 1 demonstrates. So demonstrates, this is the simple present. Another one is genomics provides crucial info. So when I say genomics provides crucial info, this is a fact, right? It's a statement that you're making which is general, it's generally true. So there are various times when you have to use the simple present. These are just a couple of examples that I wanted to take. Now let's try and understand what the simple present is used for. Okay, I'm just going to remove these examples now. So the simple present is, if you look at, now what I've drawn here is called a timeline. Okay, now we start from the past, we go to the future, and this is the point, this is the present right now, in any given point of time, wherever you are. There is a present, there's a future, there's a past. So we'll look at that, and that's what this timeline represents. And with this timeline in mind, we look at what the simple present talks about. So the simple present can be represented by something like this. Okay. Now, what do I mean by these lines? So what this means is, if I look at something at this point, this is a point in the past. Will this thing still be true? Was it still true in the past? Yeah, it was. Is it still true now? Yes, it is. Is it still true? Will it still be true in the future? Yes. So genomics, what was the example? Genomics provides crucial information, right? Genomics provides crucial information. I've written that. So we'll just write that here. Genomics provides crucial information, right? Genomics provides crucial information. Now, did it do that in the past? In the past, did genomics provide crucial information? Now, doesn't have to be hundreds of years in the past. Anytime, sometime in the recent past, yes. Does it still do that? Yes. Will it still do it in the future? Probably yes. At least for a few more years, it will give crucial information. Probably continue for a long time. So in such cases, what we call these kind of statements are facts, right? We call them facts. That it's true for a long long duration of time. So that's why I've drawn these things. So for a long elongated period of time, these statements will remain true. So table 1 below shows. Table 1 below shows that, right? Shows that, demonstrates that. Yeah. So why am I saying shows and not showed? Because it's not something which is over. It is something which will remain true for a long period of time. So whenever you use anything that will remain true for a long duration of time, you would use the simple present. Now, actually, I'm just going to remove these other tenses for now. We'll cover one tense at a time. Now, so you can use them for tables, figures, charts, graphs, definitions, because definitions will remain true, right? Facts and universal truths. If you're in the social studies and you're studying a population and the population has a certain habit which they do repeatedly, you can also represent that with the simple present. Any kind of description. If you have an experiment that you're describing, or you're describing some kind of a new compound that you've developed, or a new invention that has come about, that description again would be in the simple present. Okay, we'll try and look at one example each in a bit, but also anything that's part of a schedule. Okay, and we'll again look at one example. So I'm just going to pause the video here and write down some examples for each of these points. Okay, so I've got a few examples up over here. I'm sure that you can come up with better examples, but here are a few that I could think of. Now, definitions, of course, any definition. Just take a definition of anything in your subject, and you'll find that it is in the simple present. Okay, so I'm not going to give you an example of that. Tables and figures. Yeah, I've just given you an example over here. Facts and universal truths, we've got this. Genomics provides crucial information about. So that's a fact, right? Water boils at 100 degrees under normal circumstances. That's a fact. You can consider it a universal truth or a fact. Right. Now, habits. What kind of habit would you draw about in scientific writing? Sometimes you could write something like, scientists often wait before handling corrosive liquids. That is a habit, something that people do often. Again, if you look at the timeline, it's something that people will always, something which they're doing now, which they will stop, or they did in the past, which they don't do anymore, or they don't do it now, they will do it in the future. No, it's whenever they handle, at any point, whether in the past or the future or the present, where if they touch a corrosive, or if they're handling a corrosive liquid, they tend to wear gloves. So it's true over an extended period of time, right? Description. The new facility uses sustainable features. You're describing a new facility, and it's something that's going to be true for a long time. If it's using sustainable features, it's probably going to continue using sustainable features for a long duration of time. Now, this is one difference between the simple present and the present continuous. If you're referring to something which will be true for a long period of time, you would tend to use the simple present. Like, the new facility uses sustainable features. It indicates that it is going to be true for a long period of time. However, if you say the new facility is using sustainable features, the implication is that it is using it now, but it is likely to not use it for a very long time. Yeah. So whenever you use the present continuous, it means that it's a temporary arrangement. It's going to be for the short term. But if you use the simple present, then it's indicative that it will be true for a long duration of time. Okay. Now, a schedule. What kind of a schedule could you be talking about? The project ends in July. Okay. The new research results come out in January. So some people will say, why can't we say will come out in January? Okay. Or project will end in July. You can say the project will end in July. That's fine. Okay. But if you're absolutely sure, if it's part of a schedule, if it's something that's a timetable or a schedule, then it's preferred that you use the present tense because it's considered to be true. It's already laid out. The schedule has already been made, and you know that this is when it ends. There may be changes, of course. There may be last minute changes, or maybe because of a pandemic, things may change. Like this semester, earlier we could have said this semester ends in April, but now, or the majors happen in April, because according to the timetable it was going to happen in April, but now they will happen in July because of the pandemic things have changed, right? But usually there are no pandemics, and generally it is accepted that if something is a part of a schedule, you can use the simple present. Okay, but these are, of course, there would be some other cases where you might want to use the simple present. Sometimes when you're giving directions to people, go left, turn right, go straight, things like that. But I don't know if you would really use that in academic writing. So these are some of the common reasons for you to use the simple present. Okay, and what it generally means is that no matter when you look at it, it is something that will remain true, that remains true for a long duration of time. That's what the simple present means. Okay. Now let's look at the structure of the simple present. What is it? What is the structure like? Okay. All right. So the structure, when I make a simple statement, just a simple statement, I'm not asking a question. I'm not, so a simple positive statement, okay? I'm not saying something in the negative, I'm not asking a question, and I'm not using the passive. This is the active voice. A simple statement is subject plus either V1 or V5. Now this is something we'll look at in subject-verb agreement, when to use V1 and when to use V5, and then the verb. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what V1, V2, although we discussed this in class, and this is not, this is just something that grammar books represent certain forms of the verb with. So if you don't understand V1, V2, V3, that's fine. If you don't agree with this, that's also fine. Yeah, but what we're talking about is V1 is the first form of the verb, the present, the base form of the verb, go, right? Then the past tense is what we call V2, the past participle, or the perfect, the tense that the form of the verb that we use in the perfect tenses is what we call V3. Then the ones that we use in the continuous tenses are the ones with ing are the ones we call V4, and the ones that we use with he, she, it, that's subject verb agreement. We'll come to that in a later lesson. But we've covered that in class, of course, but in a later video lesson, if time permits, we will also cover that. We use goes, right? So I go, but he goes. Okay, so that's the difference. So in the simple present, you would only use either this or this. Only V1 or V5. You can't use any of these other ones. Okay, so if you're using these ones, that's not simple present. If you find these, then that's not simple present. Okay, so subject subject plus V1 plus V5 plus object if required. You may not always have an object, you may have a complement, or maybe several different things, but this is the basic structure: subject plus V1 plus object. So for example, we say table 1 represents the data. Okay, table 1 represents the data. So what do we mean by table? So table 1 is your subject, represents, now why have we added the S? So it's V5 because table 1 is singular, but anyway, we'll not worry about that for now. The data, that's the object. So table 1 represents the data, right? So this is your structure for a positive sentence, right? Now let's look at some other slightly more complicated structures. Okay, so here are a few examples now. Let's try and understand the structure a little bit better. So we saw that, when we make a positive statement, you use the subject plus the verb. Okay, I'm just going to round up the verb over here. Okay, I'll probably use a different color so easier for you to understand. So data represents. Okay, the data is valid. Okay, now valid here is not a verb. Valid is an adjective. It's functioning as an adjective. Something is valid. Something is true. Yeah. So there are two kinds of sentences that you can make in the simple present. One is when you talk about something that does something, so the table 1 represents, so it's doing something, or you say the data is valid. So here you're just saying it is. Okay, so either you're saying that someone does something, or or you say someone is something. Okay, so either someone does or someone is. Okay, these are two things you need to understand, because the structure changes depending on whether someone does or someone is. Not in the positive statement, but in other forms. Okay, let's look at those now. Again, we have the negative statement now. Here we are saying something is, but here we are saying something is not. Okay, so, or does not. Okay? So here, what's happening is, so here's your verb represents, but here what's happening is, now again in subject verb agreement you'll see why this has become represent. Here it's represents, but here it's represent. Why is that? Because here the do has already become does. Okay, we've added this, we have to add this, otherwise it's not right. And because table 1 is singular, the s or es that we add has already been added here, so you don't need to add this here. If you say doesn't represents, that's wrong. Okay, so doesn't represent, or in the second form of the sentence, type of sentence, where you're saying is something, then you're saying is not. Okay, so doesn't represent, right? There are two verbs, or we say isn't. Similarly, when you make a question, you say does table 1 represent. So the first helping verb has to go before the subject. That's how you form questions. So while we're learning tenses, I think this is a good platform for you to practice making questions as well, because you will have to ask your research questions when you write your thesis, or when you submit an article, you will have to discuss what the questions were that you asked sometimes, right? So when you're asking questions, you need to remember that it is always the first helping verb. It's the first verb, either whether it's a helping verb or a main verb, it's the first verb which goes before the subject. So table 1 doesn't represent, does table 1 represent? Of course, you can also use it in the negative. You can also say doesn't table 1 represent, right? Depending on what you want to say. But the first verb will go before the subject, right? Again, here you find something similar. Here you're saying the data is valid, but that is jumps to the beginning, right? Is the data valid? But here there's only one verb. So you'll find that whenever you use the do form of the verb, something is doing something, something does something, then there's a helping verb and a main verb. But when you're just saying someone is something, or something is so and so, then there's only one verb, even in the question. Okay. Now we move to the passive, right? The data is represented by. Now one thing that you need to know is, in all forms, wherever you can use the passive, you'll always find that the verb form that is used is V3. The main verb is always the V3 in passive. Okay. What makes a difference is what follows before it. Okay. So here is where you use is, or am, or are. Okay. So these are the three forms that you can use. Okay. Is represented by. The data is valid. This is something we cannot use in the passive, because to use something in the passive, it needs to have an object, because in the passive it's the object that is performing. Okay, it's usually the subject performs the action. The subject in the passive receives the action from the object. So the object is performing the action, right? So for that, an object has to exist, but in this kind of a sentence there is no object, so you can't convert that to passive. But this table 1 represents something, so that something becomes the object. So although we don't mention that, we say the data here, right? Table 1 represents the data, let's say, right? So the data is represented by table 1. So here we have an object which has now become the subject, right? But this is how you form it. So you use is, am, are, and then you use V3. Is represented by, is found, is looked at, and so on and so forth, right? So we will stop here with this tense. I will make another. So I'm going to make one video tomorrow with the past and the present perfect, and then I will share that with you. So today we have an evaluation. I think by the time you receive this video, you would have received the email. you would have attempted the evaluation. So just keep doing that. We'll give you several evaluations on tenses to see how well your research writing skills are, how well you're able to use your tenses in these exercises. And once all these videos are done, we'll give you a consolidated test on tenses as well. So I'll try and finish them this week, the ones on tenses, and then we can move on to subject-verb agreement. So this is all about the simple present tense. And if you have any questions, please write to us. Please send me an email saying that, hey, this is not something that I was clear with, or please explain this point again. And when I make the next video, I will include these points in the discussion. Okay, so good luck. Hope you're all safe. Hope you're staying home, and hope your thesis and your research is not being affected too much. So yeah, we will meet soon, and hopefully all of this will be behind us, and we will be able to resume things as before. So good luck, stay safe, be healthy, and see you soon. Bye.